Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at mixing some drums with only stock plugins found in Logic. I've done a few videos on the past on how to mix drums and they turned out great. However, I know lots of people only use Logic, so I thought I'd make a video dedicated to how to make your drums sound a lot better with only the tools you have available in Logic. So let's jump right in. So this is my dry drum sound just with some basic levels and panning. This is after I turn on all the processing. I'm going to bypass everything again and slowly bring it on one thing at a time so you can get a feel for what's going on. So the first thing I did was I put a gain plugin on every channel. Just lines up the phase on a few things and helps them hit harder and have less cancellation of frequencies as we go. I've got a gate on all my close mics. You can see this is opening only slightly when the snare hits. It helps to cut out, bleed from the other mics and things like that. Same thing on the snare bottom, except I'm triggering it off of the snare top. So they're both opening and closing when the snare top is happening. And on this one, I just did a little bit of reduction so that you can still hear the any ghosting that's happening, or just adds a little realism back into it. Here's without them. And here's with it. Here's all the close mics without gates. And here's with the gates. Really tightens it up, gets all the other junk out of there. So you're just hearing the mic you want to hear. All right. And then they all got compressed. And for drums, I really like to use the vintage VCA. It's like the, I think it's the closest you can get to the SSL compressor within Logic. So here's with all the compression engaged. Oh, I stand corrected. Looks like I used Studio FET on some stuff. Okay, all the kicks got the vintage VCA, and the snare's got the 1176. I'm sorry, the Studio FET. And then rack toms, back to vintage VCA. And in most of the cases, I did a fairly slow attack at 19 milliseconds and a quick release at 11 milliseconds. Ratio 3:1, and I'm aiming for like between 2 and 3 decibels of gain reduction. So that's what's going on there. After that, I EQ'd all the close mics. Here's what we have so far. Here's with the EQ. So I'll click through each one real quick and let you see what's going on. Throughout this whole process, I'm trying a technique where you use your high pass filter and push the resonance up a little bit and use that as your low end boost for each mic. So cutting out a lot of mud in there. Boosting a little bit of snap up top. For this, same thing. Cutting lows up to a certain point, and then boosting at that point. Getting rid of mud. Boost and detail on the top. All right, sub kick. Same thing. Cutting lows, boosting above where I'm cutting. Oh, end of the song. Here we go. Let's go back a bit. Yep. Mud. A bit of attack right there. So that's the kicks. For snare, same thing, cut the rumble. We're boosting that right there. Lots of mud taken out. Boosting some detail and impact, about 3.5K, and then a high shelf around 8 or 9K. Get all that air on top. Very similar curves on the snare bottom. Boosting lows again, cutting all that mud, and getting some high-end sizzle added in there. All right. I'll briefly go through the toms, but they're all very similar curves. Cutting and boosting around the lows, getting rid of mud and adding detail. They're all very similar. Yeah. Only slight differences depending on the frequencies coming from the drum. For the hi-hat, I don't like to compress my hi-hat mics because you end up bringing up noise from other drums that are being captured in the mic. So, I have the gain there in case I wanted to flip the phase, and then I'm just cutting out some lows. And that's it for that. Next thing are the overheads. First thing is the compression. Same thing with the slow attack, fast release to add some punch. One thing I forgot to mention, on all the compressors, I turned this distortion from off to soft. I don't know what to say about it other than it makes it sound better. Adds a little bit of saturation. The only thing to note is it does also make your signal louder. So I usually complement that by taking away a dB on the output. So here is without that. Here's with it. It just helps. It's really subtle, but when you do it on all your channels, it really starts to make a difference. All right, for the EQ, a little more gentle on the EQ on this because it's a picture of the full drums. Cutting some lows, cutting some mud, boosting some presence, and boosting some highs. See, if we go too dramatic with it, it starts to sound weird and processed. So, just a bit. For the lows, I'm boosting right where that snare hits to help improve that. That's all the good detail right there, around 3 or 4K. And then depending on the context of the rest of the mix, I'll either boost or cut here, depending on if I want energy or save room for other things. Right now I like it boosted. Okay, on the room mics. For this compression, I did a little bit of a faster attack because I want to tame those transients. Taming the transients will help to make the room sound larger and almost explosive in a way. So here's without it. And here's with it. Next for the room mics are the EQ. Took out a little bit of mud between 3 and 400. Just a little bit. And then boosted some detail between 1 and 2K. Great. Now we're going to get into some more advanced stuff. The first thing that I messed around with that I thought was really cool was on the snare, this Fat Effects plugin. Here's without it. Here's with it. So a little more punch, a little more distortion. The two things I used the most here were the distortion section, and I added a little bit of diode, a little bit of soft saturation, and a little bit of tube. I also used the bass enhancer here, about 48% of the warm type. And then you can set a frequency for that too, which is neat. So I pushed it as high as it could because I wanted closer to 200, but 150 is still helpful. That really helps it to punch. Yeah, that's nice. So that wraps up the close mic processing. The next thing is kind of these groups and the master bus. So the very first group that's getting processing is the parallel. So I'm using bus 1 for that. It's everything, but a little bit less of the overhead in the room because I really want to add impact to the close mics, not as much to the room. Also, in sending the overheads in the room to the parallel, you can start to be at risk for that weird cymbal pumping sound, which I don't like. So here's without the compression. And here's with it. Big transient, lots of impact. I did a slow attack at 18 milliseconds, fast release at 18 milliseconds, ratio at 4:1, and then the threshold super low at -41. So here's what's going on. It's almost minus 20 dB of gain reduction, which is wild. But when blended in, it sounds awesome. Here's without it. Here's with it. Next, I wanted to add a reverb to increase the space. So I used bus 2 for that, and I chose Space Designer, and I started with green chamber, and then I made a few adjustments. Here's without it. Here's with it. This by itself. One thing to note is, oh, I didn't do it. Well, that's a bad habit. It's best practice to take some low and highs out of your reverb to help it sit better in the mix. It's not going to get in the way of things actively using the super lows and the super highs. Yeah. That's a little better. That'll help clean up the kick drum and keep that low end more in the center. I did add one more reverb, but only on the snare. And it's a gated verb that I chose in Chroma. I chose the Collins gate, and I might have left it as is. I really like that preset. There's by itself. This basically helps to just add a little width and depth to the snare. Here's without it. With it. It's very subtle, but it's those small details that help really make your mix sound good. All of the close mic's output goes to bus 4, which is this just drum dry bus here with no processing on it. And then I sent all of these, the parallel, the 2 reverbs, and the drum dry, they go to this drum master here. And then I use the faders on these groups to dial in a good drum sound that I want to move forward with. And from there, I did some bus processing. So the first thing was another compression, same slow attack, fast release, but very gentle on this one. Here's without it. And with it. Helps the snare punch a little more. It adds another layer of that nice soft distortion. All good things, but gentle. Next is the graphic EQ. Here's without it. Here's with it. So really using that to push some low end, mostly 125. And then I cut out some mud at 500 and a little at 1K. Left 2K alone, and I pushed 4 and 8K. And And then I actually rolled off some 16K because that starts to add up over all your drums. Yeah, I'll push the 16 so you can hear it. I guess it's nice if you're into that sort of thing, but I am not. So I pulled that down a little bit. Next, I did the fat effects on the drum master, mostly to add more distortion again, but I did add some bass enhancer at 90. So here's without it. And with it. Subtle things, tiny little improvements. This last one, I really went down the rabbit hole of experimenting. When I mix with plugins, I almost always use some sort of tape saturation or tape simulation on my drums or my master or both. So I was really missing that kind of sound. So the closest I could get was with this tape delay plugin. The delay time is 0 milliseconds so that it's instant. It basically, once you set it up like this, this feedback would turn into your distortion knob essentially. And you really don't want a lot of this because it's a weird sound. But I'll pull down the dry and let you hear what's going on with the wet. And then as you pull this up, it gets saucy. Obviously don't go above 100 because you're going to start oscillating. But too low is nothing. Nothing going on. It's a real interesting way to saturate your drums, but it works for me and I like it. If I was mixing with just Logic exclusively, I would use this method a lot. So here's without it. Here's with it. Again, all subtle stuff, but really helps add up over the course of a mix. So one last time, here is with no processing. And then add it all back in. That's about it for mixing drums with stock plugins and Logic. I'm sure there's a lot more you could do and come up with, but I really like the sounds I came up with today. If you have any questions or other ideas for videos, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching and make sure you like and subscribe.